To talk to you today about a project that myself and some of my colleagues are doing about opening qualitative data. Now, if you ask a qualitative researcher to open their data, you're going to get into a very passionate and very structured two-stage discussion. The first discussion that you're going to have is about the philosophical, is it philosophically relevant to a almost entirely subjectivist methodology to make their data open, that kind of thing. And the second question is, okay, if you think that you do want to make your data open with all those considerations, practically, how do you do that in an ethical manner? Our work is going to look at the second question, but I did want to really briefly touch on this first question, just for context more than anything else. So, does it make sense to open your qualitative data? When anyone talks about open data, the first thing they're going to talk about is reproducibility, to the point where you will have seen this cute little logo on my last slide, which is the logo for the UK Reproducibility Network, which sort of indirectly funds this work because it pays most of my salary. And I just wanted to make everybody aware of that and sort of address the elephant in the room, that it's really prominent. And I don't want that narrative to ever stop qualitative researchers from making their data open, because I think there are other reasons, even though this particular argument is almost never relevant to us. So the other reasons, the first one that I wanted to talk about is that it improves credibility. So qualitative research is, almost always subjective. But in the words of quite a prominent open qualitative scholar that I recently had coffee with, I'm worried that people are using subjectivity to say whatever the bleep they want. And making data open is just one possible tool to address this, right? And there could be ways that people are twisting their qualitative data, not intentionally. Like, most of it's sloppy research. There's sloppy research in quantitative research, and there's sloppy research in qualitative research. For example, a couple of decades ago, I think there was a lot of discussion around thematic analysis, and people saying they were doing thematic analysis but not talking about what that meant, what kind they were doing, how they were doing it, that kind of thing. There's also sort of a lot of discussion around the fact that qualitative researchers usually know their participants quite intimately, and they want to present them in a positive light. So presenting your data alongside your findings, if you can, is one way of improving your credibility and just demonstrating to people how you got to the conclusions that you made. The second one is that it reduces research waste. Qualitative data is time consuming and expensive to collect, and that's a big problem in itself. I just heard recently in one of these other Open Research Week talks that 85% of funding for biomedical research is sort of considered wasted, which is a huge amount, and there's no reason to think it'll be different for qualitative research. So it's really important to not sort of put all this money into stuff without a justification. The other aspect that comes into this as well is that a lot of qualitative participants will participate in studies because they want what they're saying to have an impact on people. So this is a little quote from Mazursky and colleagues who actually asked qualitative participants whether they were all right with their qualitative data being shared. So I'll just read it. If I'm going for research, or someone is doing research on me and gathering information, then I actually want that information to be shared, so everybody will know the information and everybody put their dots together to come up with the solution. I think it's a good idea because there's a lot of things going on that need to be researched, and if I can help, I'm glad to help, right? So, and what was quite interesting in this particular study is that wasn't something that was asked about. It was just something that almost all participants spoke about immediately, like really prominently, and they felt was really important. They were doing this research to help people. They wanted to help people. So the last one that I want to talk about, and I was almost like a little bit reluctant to put this in, but policy. It might be that you're mandated to make your data open. No, we should never ever be doing anything because policy says we have to, and we just haven't critically addressed it. But that might be the case. So I wanted to put a quick pin in that and talk about it later. So I'm not saying that anybody should ever make their qualitative data open. Like, Definitely. I'm just saying that I think there are other reasons apart from reproducibility why you might want to. And I just wanted to set that up as a basis before I jumped into the second question of, okay, practically, how do we do that? So, um, in terms of practically, how do we do that? I wanted to talk about the project that we've got. So, practically, there are a lot of problems. A lot of them come from confidentiality. A lot of them come from sort of the amount of time it's going to take to anonymize interview transcripts and stuff. And that's sort of where we were with our own project. And we decided to address it with a scoping review. Possibly procrastinating making those decisions ourselves, to be honest. But so this is the methodology we have for doing this scoping review, which aimed to collect all of the concrete actions that addressed barriers to opening qualitative data across all of the literature, which we found was about 3 decades worth of literature. So there's a lot there. And we wanted to present it in a nice and easy way. So here's our methodology. For people who are familiar with scoping reviews, it's a really basic scoping review. There's nothing massive to talk about apart from the fact that I will just say that we did include great literature. But for those of you who aren't familiar with scoping reviews, they're very similar to a systematic review, but you don't do any quality assessment on it. You stop before quality assessment and just say, look, here is all of the relevant literature that I found. I've put this into a nice and structured way so that you can read through it all and come to a decision on your own about what you think about that literature. Now, these are our results. So we organized the data that we extracted by the barriers that the actions sought to solve. So these were then 8 themes, 9 themes there are the barriers that were identified in the literature. None of these are particularly surprising, which is really great for us because it meant that we sort of thought that we had an idea of what was going on to begin with, which is great. And I also really want to highlight that there was quite a bit on researcher distress, which was quite surprising and quite nice for me because I think that's a really valid reason to not do it. Like if you're putting data out there, you are responsible for that, and we should all feel comfortable in being able to do that and not feel like we're compromising any of our morals. So what did we do with that? Well, we wanted there will be a paper that's being written at the moment, but far more importantly for me personally is that we put it all into this sort of structured table-based tool that we're hoping is going to make it a lot easier to scan through that literature and find the actions that you need. So this is the first couple of pages, and I'll talk you through what we've done with this tool. So each theme of barriers that people might address has got its own table. For example, theme 1, confidentiality. On the left-hand side, you've got the individual barriers. So within confidentiality, barrier 1A is identifying identifiers. That's hyperlinked down to some explanatory text underneath, so you can have a read through and see whether that's exactly what your barrier is. So identifying identifiers is, I don't know how to identify what counts as identifiable information. You can then move on to the right of the table, and you can see the suggestions that are provided. So a de-identification analysis, and then right again, you can see the suggested reading, which is where we've linked to the texts that we got that suggestion from. And then right again, it gives a content of why have we recommended this text to you? What's in it? What do you think you're going to get out of reading it? So then you can make an informed decision of, okay, well, is this something that is worthwhile for me to go and read? I wanted to have a look at how you might use this in person. So I want you to imagine a fictional researcher called Alice, right? Alice researches researchers, okay? But she's only situated within her department. So she doesn't know what might be an identifier within different departments. People might have, like some departments are really small, so things are going to be more identifiable within there. If people have particular speaking styles or accents, that kind of. I'm from Bristol. I use the word in it a lot, which isn't super common in academic circles. So that's probably counts an identifier for me. But people are not going to know that unless they know me personally. So Alice wants to think about how to address this. She goes to theme 1, confidentiality, because this is a confidentiality consideration. She finds population insider knowledge. She looks down at the explanatory text that's hyperlinked underneath and confirms that that is the issue that she is having. So she goes to the suggested reading, and from the different suggested readings, she manages to extract some solutions from which she creates her own data management plan. So she takes from Campbell's paper, member checking. So member checking the de-identification. She uses Campbell's script for explaining the de-identification process to her participants. And she conducts stakeholder consultations, which is outlined in Campbell's methodology. In this particular case, the stakeholders would be professors, so that's who she's consulted. But Alice is also a responsible researcher, so she understands that she has to use her own sort of critical thinking and experience with her subject matter to apply some other things that weren't in any of these suggested readings. So she also adds for departments without contacts that she sort of is familiar with. She's really overcautious in de-identification, and she decides to remove identifiable speech patterns. So I'm hoping that's a reasonable overview of the tool, but I want to go back to something else that I said at the beginning, which I put a pin in, which is what if the literature doesn't help? So what if you have a really, really sensitive topic or something that it's on the cusp of being philosophically relevant, but in order to understand what people are saying, they need an awful lot of context, that kind of thing. Well, it might be that you're still being asked to make this open. I've taken a screenshot of this paper because this, I think the date isn't on there, but I think it's 23, where as open research becomes more and more prominent, more and more funders and journals are making it mandatory to make your data open, which causes real problems for qualitative researchers. And one thing that I was really worried about is what I don't want is for people to see this work and think that this counts as us saying there's no reason you shouldn't, there's all these solutions, right? But actually what we also envisage that it could be used for is that somebody has been asked to make their data open, and they're able to say, actually, look, here is this paper that has extracted every single suggestion from 3 decades of research from experts of how to make qualitative data open. And still, with all of this information, I cannot ethically make the data that I have open. And this is why I can't do that. So I just wanted to acknowledge that that's sort of my answer to the policy thing. If you are being, like, if it's mandatory for you to make your qualitative data open, I would suggest using this tool more as a way to critique that and fight back against mandatory open data policies than a way of trying to justify to yourself to make data open if you think it isn't going to be ethical to do so. So that is and now Alice is happy because she's used the tool and she feels a bit better. That is my talk. And are there any questions?